Today I'm going to talk to you about confidence, how to be confident enough. I thought about naming this video how to be confident, or how to be as confident enough to do anything at all, or the surprising 10 ways to be confident. And I realized you definitely don't want to be completely confident to do anything all the time. That'd actually be a recipe for disaster. Most of us want to be confident enough. Yeah. So I'm going to tell you how to do that. And there are a bunch of sources for this. So even though that one's a bit clickbaity, I thought it's actually pretty good. So why we're doing this one now, a few people have been asking me, a few of my mentees have been asking me, saying, how do I be more confident? Okay, it depends, and then I need to tell them the whole thing, so now I can just send them this. The other one is we've got a confidence event coming up online. It's like a little summit. For those of you who've not been to our summits before, go to embodimentunlimited.com. Every couple of months, we do a free event, and there'll be me and a bunch of guest speakers doing different embodiment stuff. This time it's around confidence and something called Embodied Toolkit. So embodimentunlimited.com. Quick plug if you want to have a look at that. All right, so what is confidence? There's different definitions out there. I think the first thing we need to do is differentiate it from competence. Yeah. So am I good at something? Can I do a particular skill, a particular quality? And that's also normally defined by what other people think, right? Am I a competent driver? Well, everyone thinks they are, but who says? Have you had claims on your insurance for 10 years or something, right? Some kind of objective measure. Are you competent to fly a plane? Well, there's normally a sort of societal standard for that as well. And you can literally just do the thing. So as well as a sort of social side of competence, whether people approve you or not, you could not have a pilot's license, but actually know how to fly a plane. Yeah. So you get competent through a skill. Skills take time and practice. This is really important. So this isn't about a belief in oneself. Some definitions of confidence will say something like that. Belief in oneself, very American. Talk about the cultural side of this in a bit. Actually, belief in oneself is actually pretty bloody dangerous if that's generalized to all skills. So this tends to be imparted by certain kinds of parenting style. I'd say there's a sort of a fundamental belief in oneself that you can learn something, yeah. And I think this is, just people who are sort of secure attachment have that, that basic belief. What, I'm a basically not stupid, a good person. I can learn something. But a generalized belief in oneself, if your parents tell you continuously, you're amazing, you're awesome, oh, that's highly dangerous. Imagine you believe you can fly a plane and you couldn't, all right? So generalized belief in oneself can be very dangerous and not necessarily what we're looking for here. It's normally differentiated from lack of confidence, and on the other side of things, arrogance. Yeah, thinking, again, that could be thinking you can do anything, so we need this skills-based kind of model. And on the other side of things, most of the people are asking about confidence on this other side of things. So if someone says, do I have a problem with confidence? The first thing I'm going to try and understand is their level of competence. So for me, confidence is the skill that enables other skills. It's appropriately self-assessing oneself. It's being able to do the thing that you can do. Because if you don't have confidence, you can't do all the things you can do. Make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Being able to do the things you can do, that would be a definition of confidence I quite like. So this doesn't involve sort of belief in oneself unnecessarily on a fundamental level. You also notice it doesn't really involve feeling. So we'll talk about I'm feeling confident. Well, is that the key thing? Is the key thing your internal subjective state, or whether you can do the thing? I would suggest it's do the thing. And, hence the sort of feel the fear and do it anyway. Apparently quite a good book, by all accounts. I quite liked it when I read it years ago. Fake it till you make it, those kind of things. So you're not faking it, you're making it until you feel like you're not faking it. So that's make it until you feel like you're not faking it to make it. Oh, fuck it, I'm lost. You know what I mean? So the subjective feeling isn't important. And this is really important because we tend to look at other people who are doing something, go, oh, they must feel really confident. They may or may not. Yeah, there are people who, till the day they die, just will always, performers who would get sick before going on stage or get nervous before performing a music, whatever. And that's out of line with their actual competence. Assuming they've been doing it for years, they're pretty good at it. They've had the feedback socially, and they can clearly demonstrate the skills. There's kind of two sides to that. But they still have this feeling inside, but they're doing it. So that might be unpleasant. In a way, it's not the key thing. Also, there's this old saying I really like of not to compare your own inside with other people's outside. Someone might look fine. I've definitely mastered the art of sort of looking relatively confident while doing a talk, for example. But I will get nervous doing a talk, particularly if there's more than, say, 200 or 400 people present, or there's a lot riding on it, or there's a particular circumstance. I was at CERN not long ago, it was the particle accelerator, and there was a particularly unusual group, academics. It's a bit not quite my normal scene. I felt a bit nervous, but you wouldn't necessarily have known that unless you were a very keen body language observer. So, feeling, be a little bit careful of that one. Definitions are based on that. Yeah, another way of looking at this is your self-reliability. So often when someone comes to me and says, I don't feel confident, they're not yet reliable to themselves. This is one element of self-trust. I'll go to the end of this in a minute. So what does that mean? It means, say someone says, I'm going to turn up at 8, and they're always there at 8. Right? I remember when I was a kid, there was my friend Jeff used to come around on his bike, and he was always there exactly the same time in the morning. We always go to school together. I'd hear him do a skid on the gravel outside my house. I go, I said to Mum, that's Jeff, we've got to go. Same time, every day, super for like 2 or 3 years. Super reliable that way, yeah? And he wasn't the first time he did that, or the second or the third, but by the 10th, and certainly by the 100th time he'd done that, he's reliable. So being reliable to oneself takes experience. So often what people are saying to me is, how do I feel okay when I'm not yet experienced at this thing? And I'm like, well, you're not yet experienced. You probably will feel nervous, and that's not a bad thing. Your system's saying, hey, be careful, be careful. How we assess feelings is important. So you might feel what someone else would say nervous or not confident, and you might assess that as, okay, I'm ready, I'm alert, this is telling me it's important, that's a good thing. Yeah, someone else might sense that feeling, and this is what what's it called, a panic attack is, where you kind of go into a circle negatively assessing the feeling, and then it gets worse and worse and worse. So the assessment, kind of cognitively, of what's going on there is important. But again, the key thing is really competence. You haven't done it a lot. Like, of course, you think about the first time you kissed someone. Of course you were nervous. You hadn't done it before. There's potential social consequences, right? You're being assessed. You're being judged. That is another key thing, actually, is how much you care about other people's opinion. So while one level of nervousness can come from the skill itself, another level of nervousness, lacking of confidence, can come from how you're perceived and how much that matters to you. So I don't know, what would be an example of this? Let's say you were parking, and I'm kind of not a great reverse parker currently, and I hadn't practiced it very much, and I'm parking and people watching, I might feel bad about that rather than just doing it on my own. I wouldn't feel so bad, right? And that again make one less confident in that way. But again, we're really basing this on the social feedback in the loop of the kind of the competent side of things. So often when people say, I'm not confident, it's like, yeah, you shouldn't be. You ain't done it much, Like, what are you confident to do? Are you confident to brush your teeth? Are you confident to have a shower? I mean, in my world of sort of coaching, therapy, yoga, often we just haven't put the hours in, because it's not always easy to put the hours in. They're often newly qualified. So it's like, just do it a lot, right? Like I teach a lot of embodiment coaches, and I'm like, well, yeah, I've done thousands of hours of this, and you've done 10 hours of this. Like, just go get a bunch of clients, give away a load of free work, just get really, really good, bam, 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 bashing it out and doing it, and then it just becomes normal. And to normalize the thing. Now, the trick to that, if you are new to something, is how close can you get to it? Yeah. So again, confidence here isn't built through telling yourself, like affirmations. I'll come to more of that in a minute. It's built through doing the thing. And if you can't do the thing, what's the nearest you can do to it? Like, a flight simulator, for example. Right, that's why it's great, because it's a bit closer to flying than just pretending or reading a book. One thing I'll do, for example, if I'm nervous on talks, I'll get on the stage and actually practice my lines before the auditorium fills up or whatever, and I'll be like, great, I'm actually in that environment. So the physical environment is very helpful, getting used to that. As this is my place. Yeah, now it's partly narrative, like when I'm in a theatre or something, I'm doing a talk, I'll say, this is my theatre, welcome to my house kind of thing. That's a framing, that's a perspectival shift. But there's also just this element of practicing doing the thing as close as possible. So, on our courses, we'll have people watch me. So being role modeling someone from is really important as well. So your brain doesn't really know the difference between you doing it and seeing someone else do it in some ways. And then practicing with their peers and then practicing with volunteers who don't pay. All right, so they should have this nice gradual gradient of feeling a bit nervous the first time they do it with their peers, then they get relaxed with that, then a bit nervous the first time they do it with unpaid volunteers, and then a bit nervous the first time they do it with paid clients, then maybe a bit nervous again when they have like hardcore oligarch client paying the millions or whatever. Notice that last situation though is actually any different. That's what you're making it. You're making it somehow more important. So a key thing with all this is to be able to fail. And this is like, if the thing is the fundamental source of your self-esteem, you're screwed. You're screwed, right? Of course you'll be nervous. Of course you'll be nervous. You're making yourself dependent upon it. So if your view of this is a bit deeper now, right? If your view of yourself is, I am wanted by men as a woman, or I am a clever person, I'm a teacher, I'm very clever. Anything which is a threat to that is an existential threat. It's very different from the skill, isn't it? So this is the kind of Buddha's teaching on suffering and attachment. If we're attached to our ability, we're going to suffer much more, because what's on the line, if it's being assessed, if it's being tested, is not just the skill, but us as people. So the kind of non-attachment side of this, not getting our self-esteem from things that we're just getting good at, that can be taken away. It's actually, I've noticed this actually. I've only ever had this from women actually, and I think it's because they're more empathic, so they can give better insults. One of the worst insults someone will do is they'll see what's important to you, and then say, "Oh, in my case, I expected better from an embodiment teacher," or you're not a very good embodiment teacher, or you can't be very good at your job. It's actually very devilish to do that. I've had it done a few times, by Russian women actually, who were upset about something. And it's really hurtful, because it's like they're honing in on the identity, because that's where the most pain is. So if somebody said to me, "You're not a very good driver," I'd be like, okay, well, my manhood isn't dependent upon that. Yeah. I'm thinking of my mate Gary thinks of himself as a great driver, I imagine. He's a pretty good driver, as far as I can see. Someone insulted his driving, like I did sort of once as a joke, and it was a bit more of a reaction from him, because to him that was a bit more closer to his identity. Yeah, for a lot of people, their jobs get very close to their identity. So it can be very threatening to not be good at that. Okay, so competence is the key thing. Practice is the key thing, practicing as close to that thing as we can. If you're still not confident in that, well, that may well be the case, because a bunch of other stuff's going on. But we should at least eliminate that first. You should first of all just look at, can you do the thing? Yeah, can you do the thing? The sort of social feedback side of that can be quite useful. One thing I've told clients, for example, who say yoga teacher clients, they weren't very confident teaching. I said, well, have you done a bunch of hours? Often the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is yes, though. And I say, okay, talk to your students, ask them the impact of your classes. And the students say, oh, I love it. It's brilliant. It changes my life. It's so, it's really helps me relax. It gives me better marriage, better kids. And also, you're such a brilliant teacher, blah, 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 blah. I think a lot of us do need to hear it externally. So while it is dangerous to make one's self-esteem based on external feedback rather than your internal values, right? You're living according to your values. That's a different confidence. I think for many of us with a skill, it doesn't really land that we're good at it until someone says, right? And enough people have told me over the years I'm a good teacher that it would be not very threatening for one person not to. I'd just be like, probably they're just weird, or maybe I screwed up that day, but it's not going to hit me on the level of being a bad teacher. So getting enough feedback over the years, and sometimes you have to ask for that. You don't have to be, doesn't have to be weird. You can say, hey, what do you get from my class? Or, hey, why do you come to my classes? If someone keeps coming back, that's pretty good feedback that they like it. Yes, this idea of sort of becoming self-reliable just by doing something a lot. Actually, one system I studied years ago said self-trust includes reliability, competence, and sincerity. and people need all those three. So competence, like I've done the thing. Reliability is I've done it over time. Sincerity, is a little bit different one here. It's like someone's lying to you about the future. But in terms of confidence, it's that you don't break your own promises. Yeah. So there's a way in which I see people have confidence in themselves, or they become reliable to themselves when they're not lying to themselves. They're not saying, right, I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. to meditate and then never do. Okay. So I do see people that live in those cycles of kind of broken promises to themselves. We all do it to some extent. We say we're not going to, eat the thing, and then we do, or whatever. We're not going to stay up late, and we do. That's one of mine. But the less you can do that, the sort of more you have a generalized trust in yourself, I would say. So I think that's important here. Good. Maybe take a breath at this point. Whew. So what have we looked at? Competence versus confidence, the social side of it, how much you're investing in others' opinions of you, the fact that it shouldn't be generalized. Confidence should be in your skills, and perhaps just a little bit on this level of, I can learn the skills, or I'm basically an okay person. It's kind of fundamental. Confidence and self-esteem, two slightly different things, but related. One of the things I teach people on self-esteem is treat yourself as someone esteemable, right? So it's like, do you wash yourself? Do you exercise? Do you look after yourself? Do you do the things that you would do if you were looking after someone else who really mattered? So if you imagine you had a house guest that you really cared about. I've got a house guest now, actually, nice guy. And you look after them, right? And it's like, why? Because they're important. So the interesting thing is you don't treat yourself like shit. You treat yourself with self-respect. You treat yourself with self-love, self-care. And I always say, if you can't do self-love, do self-care. If you can't do self-care, do self-politeness, even the British version. Then again, it builds confidence. It builds confidence in yourself. You're someone worth looking after because the behavioural evidence supports that. It's not waiting for the thought. It's doing the behavioural stuff, and then the thought comes. In terms of the thoughts, you will, sort of self-belief, you will have people to tell yourself affirmations. I think the problem with that is that if you're lying, you're lying, right? Like I might say, I'm an amazing mother, and I could tell myself that 1,000 times, and deep down, I just become, but I'm not a woman or a mum. What the fuck? That's ridiculous. Yeah. So it doesn't matter how much affirmations I make. Maybe they have their place. Certainly, I think sort of being mindful of your negative self-talk. I usually just replace that with mindfulness, or replace that with something just as realistic as possible. So phrases like, I'm learning this, I'm improving this, not I am the best at this, when you're clearly not. Like that will just be rejected by your system as obviously complete bullshit, right? If I don't know, I'm learning to box right now, right? And it's like, I'm not a total beginner, but I'm like a 2 out of 10 at this point. So if I had the thought, I'm shit at boxing, which I think I had this morning at like 8 a.m. when I was struggling, you can replace that with, hey, hang on, is that true? What's a more true thought? Okay, I'm learning boxing. I'm better than I was, but I've still got a long way to go. So it's a more realistic thought. I think that rather than like, I'm amazing at boxing, I'm not sure if that really helps because it's rejected. So self-talk stuff, that's my take on self-talk and confidence. A really interesting way is to make sure you're not abusing yourself, though, at least with your self-talk. And one of the exercises I use for this is either getting it written down, or even better, I get my client to talk to me how they talk to themselves. I sit in a chair, maybe I'll put on their scarf or their jacket or something just for fun. That actually helps, with the role taking. And I'll say, how do you talk to yourself? And so, and they'll tell me you're a piece of shit, you're awful, you're a bad mother, all these things. And usually they cry or they stop. They just can't do it. I mean, assuming they're not a complete psychopath, they just don't want to abuse me as them. Yeah, it just feels too violent, too weird to do it out loud. And I know people who have retrained themselves with this by, every time they had a kind of negative thought, they would send it to their therapist as a voice note and then replace it with another one that, again, it's more realistic, and more realistic. If it's not more realistic, again, the bullshit detectors go off. So this can be retrained. It doesn't take forever. I mean, you can retrain the habits of a lifetime in a few months, but it's quite a bit of work. We're talking a couple of months, a couple of weeks to get started and a couple of months to sink in, like most habit formation things, in my experience. But just getting it out and making people a bit more aware of it, this is why talking about what your problems are can help, because you end up talking about your self-talk and then realising, like, it's really harsh and your friend doesn't let you get away with it. And they're like, hey, Mark, come on, it's not that bad. Yeah, so that's the self-talk stuff. Let's talk about trauma. Left turn. So, trauma is one of my areas. Most of you listening to this, watching this, probably know that. Something I've done quite a lot of work in. One thing I've noticed is traumatized people often lack confidence, simply because that their unconscious belief, and it's not just a belief like a thought, it's a perceptual lens, it's a way of viewing the world. But this, let's say, belief in the biggest sense, is that the world is dangerous. So why would you be confident? Why would you do anything, right? Like that, if the world is like dangerous, that is you don't want to step forward and do anything. So if people have that generalized anxiety, that is going to undermine their confidence across the board. Because even if they're skill assessing and socially and all the other stuff I've talked about, they're going to have that generalized bodily anxiety. Yeah, and it's just looking for a place to go. So, everyone's laughing at you, you're shit at this, whatever, that's going to come very, very quickly. So there are things people can do about trauma. There are different modalities out there, TRE, somatic experiencing, EMDR, different ones for different people. Look at my other videos on trauma. But that would be, yeah, definitely a place to start. Particularly if people had adverse kind of childhood, CPTSD, that had war zone experience, car accidents, and after that they got less confident in things. Those can be, again, singular or generalized. So I'll give an example. I had a bad car crash nearly 20 years ago, and just before I got sober, and I hadn't really driven a car until a couple of weeks ago. And I got in the car and I was nervous. My friend Roma, God love her, she would lend me her car, and she's in there. She said, "I've never seen you so nervous before." It's really unusual for her. So the feedback was like, I was disproportionately nervous compared to, I don't know, I'm learning boxing and I've sometimes lack confidence, but I'm not. It's not scared of it. Yeah. So I sort of had a bit of social support from her, and I kind of just did a little bit, and I breathed, all the stuff I'm going to tell you about. And I got through it, and I got back on the bike, and less scared, I imagine, next time I go in the car. That's very specific. It wasn't like generalized PTSD from the car crash. It was just a specific, like, hey, I'm a bit nervous of cars. Obviously, I've been in a car since then a lot of times, so that's part of it. Yeah, so again, that's a phobia or a specific trauma is very different than this just general living with being in fight or flight in the nervous system. So, if it's generalized across all things like that, if they're hard to be around because you've got a kind of nervousness to you, for example, and trauma can be a shutdown, which is a different kind of thing, different kind of not stepping up. But that nervousness side of trauma, particularly the more fight flight side of things, yeah, that can really get in the way. So that's worth looking at. Good. Okay. Physical self-regulation. So we will have some fight or flight response even without trauma to new things, to difficult things. Having some self-regulatory skills will help a huge amount. So look at all my videos on centering. This is absolutely essential. So for me, centering will mean being from nervous and paralyzed to just feeling a bit nervous, but being able to do the thing. Again, definition of confidence, doing the thing you can rather than being paralyzed, rather than not being able to do the thing. It doesn't make me think, I can fly a plane when I can't. It just makes me a little bit more subjectively comfortable and a little more likely to do the thing. Yeah. Being able to self-regulate oneself, again, can come just through doing hard things repeatedly. Now, I think you can speed that up with breath work, with yoga training, martial arts training, postural training. There's things I could coach someone through that would make their self-regulation much, much better. But most people have some idea of that. Key thing is doing difficult things. It's like, okay, let's say talk about confidence, right? So let's say you start every day with a cold shower or some breath holds, or you do martial arts or boxing training I was doing this morning. Difficult things that make you a bit scared, right? A couple of times I was like, whoa, Gary, my coach Gary almost hit me in the head a few times. I was like, whoa, take a breath. It wasn't like some big technique. It was just being able to keep coming back to regulate oneself, to not let a small shock turn into a freeze, a big whole system thing that lasts. So let's imagine you start the day with your cold shower, whatever it is that's something difficult. Later on, when you're nervous about something, you have that response, but you're used to regulating. You've built that skill. You're not fragile. You're anti-fragile. In decadent society, this is tricky because a lot of people do become fragile. But if you've got those skills, brilliant. Then yes, you still feel nervous, but you're practiced at regulating that thing. Yeah, practice self-regulation. So yes, you still have the same nervousness, but the self-regulation means you can tip into that, but I can still do it even if I don't feel great. Generally, you're not going to be, doing that so well that you just suddenly become arrogant and you think you can do anything. It's interesting, actually, the parental input from people does last a long time. And being arrogant also isn't confident, and people recognize that. So what you've got in a lot of people who lack confidence is that, they shrink, they collapse in the body, they make themselves small. So bigifying is the key thing. But the other thing you've got is people like myself who were told we were great by our parents or our culture. Americans have this culture a lot more, for example. Australians sometimes have it, it's in the culture, as opposed to like Japanese or something, which is a bit more humble. And they're sort of puffed up, and actually no one's impressed. Yeah, no one's impressed. Everyone can see that you're overcompensating, that you're puffing up. People don't, it's an immature confidence, it's a bravado. Yeah, braggadociousness, is that the word? You see someone, I don't know, Tate, he just seems like he's overcompensating so hard. It just looks like immature. It doesn't look like the settled, mature masculine. Yeah. There's a steadiness to confidence. There's a steadiness of the nervous system that comes through experience, comes through over time, and through not having to prove it, to not having to prove it. I mean, this sort of brings us really on to initiation, that the uninitiated person will have this childlike quality, which in confidence, I can do it, and like that, like having to prove it isn't impressive. Like I know, for example, women can spot the difference in men generally very easily. Like women, it's one reason women aren't impressed by Tate, even though he might say some clever things. He might be a nice guy. I don't know the truth of it. But women often just dislike people that have that puffed up quality. And they find the sort of quiet, settled confidence of the mature man much more attractive, much more attractive. There's all sorts of indicators of this, right? Like listening to myself talk, by the way, which I fucking hate. Listening to myself talk, I've got a much deeper voice than I used to. I used to speak more like this, and because my vocal cords were tense, because I hadn't really dealt with my trauma, and I didn't really know what I was saying. So it's not like I'm trying to speak in a Barry White voice, but it's just naturally there's like a dropping down that comes with confidence. There's a deepening with the body. There's things like your blink rate changes. People can spot these things. People might say, I felt his energy, and this is what they're talking about, essentially, all these different things. So yes, somatic factors, somatic indicators, but the initiation, the sense of being into manhood is key, I think another key one here is like you're in touch with your ancestors. This is kind of more of a pagan perspective. It's not so psychological, but like a deep sense of knowing your people and your tribe and your culture and where you come from gives a different kind of confidence, because it's I'm Mark of the Walsh, right? I am representing my people, and that makes things important. But it also means there's like a hand on your back, or 1,000 generations of hand on your back. I don't think you can replace that with psychology, and that takes initiation. It takes being part of the culture. Like I'm from a family of teachers, right? So when I teach, I teach, but it's also my grandmother and my dad and my mum and aunties and all sorts of family members that are there with me in a kind of pagan-y way. So this is a little bit esoteric, but there's something, and even if your family weren't doing what you do, there's probably some way that they give confidence. If you go, all right, but they had that quality, or they want me to be here. My granddad was an Irish immigrant to the UK, and he was in real danger in World War II in order to earn that right, and he would want me to do well. So I think there's a security in that. It's interesting, a very specific example of this actually. I used to have a phobia of flying, and it still kicks in sometimes. It was after I was in some very bad, I was in a bad bungee jump in New Zealand that terrified me, and I was in an earthquake, a bungee jump, and some very small planes that got battered about a lot in New Zealand in a short space of time. And after that, I didn't enjoy flying so much, and it was getting a bit worse. And I had some EMDR, which is normally very good trauma therapy, and that didn't work. And then I just remembered my granddad was a bomber in World War II, the other granddad. And I just thought, wow, okay. So like this, like he was shot out by Germans going through flak over Berlin, God knows what else. It really gave me a sense of confidence. So yeah, now when I'm nervous and playing, I just imagine I'm bombing Nazis, and it works a treat. Works a treat. Yeah, I'm fucked up, aren't I? Never mind, it works. Okay, so that's initiation. On the kind of cultural side of things, again, you should be careful not to misinterpret someone's culture. Actually, someone from one culture background might not seem confident. I think Americans are particularly good at bullshitting. Frankly, they present as confident even when they're not. There's this sense of certainty. I think it's Robbins that says you have to be more certain than the other guy. And I'd always go, one, that's dangerous because you're not listening, you lack humility, you're not taking in other feedbacks. You should always have a maybe I'm not amazing, even if I've done this 100 times before, like driving a car, right? Maybe I should be a little bit careful because this is a death trap, even though I've driven a lot before, whatever the thing is. I'm teaching, I'm great at teaching, but maybe I should have some humility to take on board that feedback. Yeah. So, the certainty thing, I people talk about that a lot. I don't like it. I think it's arrogant, and as I said, that's a sort of American cultural piece, being taught to be confident no matter what. And there's positives in that. Like I definitely put myself forward in a way more than I used to because of spending time in America, American teachers and things. And this can be like ethnic, like a Jewish friend of mine was explaining this to me. A Jewish friend of mine said, listen, I'm a secular Jew, an Israeli friend. He said, but I have in my culture the belief that I'm part of the chosen special people of God. Of course I feel confident. I was like, shit. No wonder there's so many, Jewish Nobel Prize winners and stuff like that. It's like, that's a hell of a belief to have, again, a deep level. And again, the Jews aren't the only culture that have that. Most cultures used to have that, actually. It's pretty widespread. Japanese have that to some extent. Ethiopians I've come across. Brits may have that to a lesser extent now, but then they did sort of peak empire. But, there's a confidence there in certain groups. And it might be, we've conquered the world or we're a noble people. Greeks might have that, even though they haven't really been doing much of, major significance for the couple of thousand years. Sorry, Virginia, my other Greek friends. I love Greece, but, it's been a while since you've been great, hasn't it? It's been a while. All right. So the sort of cultural side of things can't be underestimated. And I think class is a big one there too. I've got friends who are posh, upper class, and they were just installed from every micro messaging, from the buildings they were in, the size of the buildings, the teachers, how the teachers would talk to them. They were just installed. You can do it was installed in them. Yeah, like believe in yourself. You're a future leader. And I noticed this when I went to business, that a lot of people in business are quite posh in the UK, and some of that's nepotism. Some of that's just economics, like you need a few £1,000 to start your business or whatever, and if you don't have it, you don't have it. But a lot of it was just they would be like, well, of course I'll succeed. I'm doing the thing. And I realized they weren't really any brighter. They weren't really any better at business in a lot of cases, particularly for the beginning. But aside from the contacts and nepotism, they just had this belief in themselves that had been installed. And I've worked with a lot of schools. I've worked with most of the schools in England, actually, as when I was younger. In outdoor education, I'd see a lot of different schools, like maybe a couple of thousand. And I noticed the sort of fee-paying schools were often great at that. I came in with a sort of attitude towards this sort of fee-paying schools, and then I realised, like, oh shit, they've got some really good teachers. Of course, the kids are confident. Of course, the kids are confident because they're believed in. And this is the key thing, right? Having one person who believes in us, and there's research on this with kids. It doesn't have to be both parents. It can be an auntie or a grandmother. I know what it's like to have a wife or a partner who believes in you as well. Someone who looks at you as if you can do it. And then you rise to that. You grow into that, right? And as a mentor, that's my job, is to believe in my mentees, not unrealistically, not to say you're going to be earning millions the first year or whatever. But I look at them, I see what they can become that they don't yet believe in, right? You can't buy that. It's like from mentor or parent or grand or whatever it is. To look at someone's potential. This potential is a sacred idea in Western culture. So look at someone and see what they yet can't see themselves. And I think of, say, Don Levine, one of my mentors. He was the dean of the University of Chicago, Aikido guy. He was a professor of sociology. He was Obama's boss at one point. And I was a fucking alcoholic little shitbag when he met me. But he looked at me and he knew I had some potential. And he would look at that rather than the alcoholic shitbag in front of him. Yeah. And that is wonderful. I'm still grateful to him to this day, actually. he saw what I could do before I could see it. And then later on, as Paul Lindon, one of my other mentors, reminded me, like, look, you've done the things that he believed you could do. I was like, oh shit, how did that happen? 15 years later. So that's a beautiful thing if you can do that as a parent or a mentor or as a teacher. It's a big deal. People rise to that. What do we got? Ethics. This is a biggie. Often not talked about, except in Buddhism. If you are ethical, you will be confident. There's two sides to this. One is the sort of, ethics, don't kill, don't steal, da, da, da. You're not looking over your shoulder, all right? And in my life, I've never done anything terrible. I've never done anything truly awful. I've done some shady things, some less than perfect things, very human things if I was going to be forgiving. And it does come with a cost psychologically, a subtle cost. It's not like I can't sleep at night because I've murdered babies or anything like that, but there's a subtle cost to unethical behavior that's there. And the other one is really just living in accordance with your values, right? Like, it's not just the confidence to do something, it's the confidence that comes from, I've been in integrity here. This was me living according to my values, whether I succeed or fail. And again, this means that the result, the pressure's taken off the result. So the confidence comes from, this is Bhagavad Gita, I think Fred Kaufman is a business teacher, taught me this years ago. This comes from the confidence of, I'm living the way I can live. And that you have control over. It's kind of stoicism as well. That you have control over, as opposed to the outcome, which is like fucking the chips fall where they may. Do you know what I mean? Like, you turn up, you do your best, you win, you lose some. That's where the confidence comes from. Yeah, like, hey, I've already won, so it doesn't matter what the outcome is here. You've already won because you've lived by your values. That's fucking big. Pause. Just pause. Think about that for a bit. Pause the recording. All right, that's ethics. Last two spiritual kind of ones. Death and oneness. So, boom, close the book. Death, facing your death, confidence doing anything. When you come to terms with the reality of death, and there's whole studies on this, whole things you can look at this, facing your death as much as a person can gives one the confidence to live fully. And I've done, when I do death meditations, for example, with my students, there's this really feeling afterwards of like they're more confident to do their life purpose, to do their thing, to pursue what they really are here to pursue, because the finality of life gives them that kick in the arse. Like, oh, I'll do that later. Later never comes. I'll do it tomorrow. Like, there's going to be infinite tomorrows. One day there might not be any tomorrows, and that they might be today. Who knows? Right? I currently have this weird vision problem, which may be because of a brain tumor. There's various things it could be caused by, some of which are relatively, stress and stuff. But I've suddenly lost a lot of vision, and I'm going to have a CAT scan at some point in the next, I think, like by the time the NHS gets round to it, when it's coming out my ear. So I have to have a CAT scan, and it's like, that gets a brain tumor. It could be me dead by 44. I thought I'd have longer. I might not. I might pop and go in my brain today. I've certainly been having some weird symptoms. If you're listening and you're out there, my mum or my sister, don't worry. It's probably not that. It's probably some bullshit thing I'm eating or some other sort of tiredness, some other thing. But it's possible. It's a possible cause, or else I wouldn't be getting a CAT scan. So we don't know when death will come. So that gives the kick in the ass to do what we need to do. That's the ultimate kind of confidence. Maybe it's one off the ultimate. Maybe the ultimate is actually oneness. So oceanic feelings, state enlightenment. I've had this as a state experience and not as a sustained trait. It's being one with everything. It's kind of a cliche, like the Dalai Lama's pizza, one with everything. But it's also true. It's also a mystical experience that goes through the ages that many people have had, of feeling one with everything. Now that is the ultimate confidence, because it takes away time. What am I scared of in the future? The future that doesn't exist, yeah? And it also takes away other. Okay, so who's judging me? I'm the judger, or whatever, yeah? It takes away all those issues. You're just in the flow of things. So, yeah, in terms of sort of, if you really want confidence, having mystical, at least experiences, and I think for those who are sort of more enlightened and sustain that, some version of that, there's a deep confidence that comes with that isn't just like, hey, a quick centering or quick positive thinking or, whatever. All right, so I want to end on sort of deep there. Whew, there's a lot there. questions in the comment below. Sure, I've forgotten a few things. I like Mark Manson on this. A few people I like on this. Jordan Peterson's got some Jungian stuff to say about it. There's a whole bunch of speakers that talk about confidence, but yeah, I think there's a few perspectives there. And remember that first one, make sure you're competent before thinking you've got a confidence issue. Good. I forgot to plug it again at the end. So edit this in, that there's an event, confidence event, embodimentunlimited.com. Beginning of September, go there. We've got some talks, different power poses and embodiment toolkit things and different speakers. And if you want more on confidence, there's more there. Got so into the fucking video, totally forgot to plug my own thing. There it is.